You're listening to The Awcast, the most awesome wrestling podcast you'll ever listen to, at least in the confines of my own mind. Let's go. And welcome back to Aftershock Wrestling Entertainment. Welcome back to The Awcast. I'm your host, Brent Fowler, and we're going to talk about some cool stuff in this episode because WarGames is coming to the main roster of WWE at Survivor Series. We're going to talk about that and my feelings on the traditional Survivor Series type matches, kind of the history of WarGames and all that, and what this could mean, and some other stuff. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Before we get into today's show, if you like the content on this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss a single video that goes up. Give us a like because it really does help. If you're an audio listener, you can find the video versions at allpodcast.com. Video listeners, go to allpodcast.com/show or find it on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts from. Subscribe to the newsletter, allpodcast.com/subscribe, and follow me on social media at The Awcast. Now back to today's show. So as announced yesterday, WarGames is going to be the highlight of Survivor Series this year, which is in November, the Thanksgiving tradition, right? It's really cool, right? If you're an old school fan like myself, or you're a fan of NXT, then you know what WarGames is all about. You know how cool that match can be. You also probably know how uncool it can be. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. First, just about the news in general. It's very interesting that we've seen all these changes take place in such a very short time since Vince McMahon's exit and Triple H's promotion to Chief Creative Officer, and all the things that have been implemented by this new regime. As far as we've seen people come back that were fired, we've seen old gimmicks come forward. We've seen people that weren't getting a push get a push. We've seen factions that were disbanded or split up or given new names come back together, even under those new names. We've just seen a lot of shakeups, a lot of mix-ups, and a lot of different things going on. So talking about Survivor Series as a whole, the entire Raw versus SmackDown thing, that's gone. That's done, over. The traditional Survivor Series matches, it seems like those are gone too. But the cool thing is that WarGames is replacing that. So we're having two matches, a men's and a women's. And we could probably assume it's either going to be 4-on-4 or 5-on-5. Not sure as far as WWE's version is gone. It's typically been 4-on-4, going to NXT with the Undisputed Era, and Team Ciampa on one occasion, Candice LeRae. I think that was a 4-women team as well. So it's always been 4-on-4 with NXT's version. The classic WCW version kind of went back and forth. Sometimes it was 5, sometimes it was 4. I think one time it was even 3 teams of 3. So, it could vary, but if they stick to the NXT model that they kind of established already, it's probably going to be 4-on-4. And that's kind of the way some of the Survivor Series traditional matches went too. Traditionally, they were 5-on-5 as well. And so the irony there, just dipping a little bit into the history of WarGames, the irony there is that Survivor Series, the concept for Survivor Series, was created to kind of counter or compete with WarGames, which they both came out in the same year. Dusty Rhodes came up with the whole concept of WarGames. It was to end the feud between his group or his friends himself, actually, and friends that he gathered to combat the threat of the Horsemen. So it was 5-on-5. I believe it was actually, I've got it right here so I can pull it up. It was the Road Warriors, Nikita Koloff, Dusty Rhodes, and Paul Ellering versus the 4 Horsemen with J.J. Dillon. That was the version that was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, and Tully Blanchard. That was the very first one in July of 1987. And then Survivor Series, the very first Survivor Series was, of course, November of 1987 as well. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let me make sure. Yeah, they did it on the same night as a house show for WarGames, I believe. I think there was a competition going back and forth that there was a WarGames match happening at the same time Survivor Series was going on. So obviously Survivor Series trumped that and took the big pay window there. But anyway, it's interesting because they're similar in concept, but completely different as well. Where War Games, if you're not familiar with what War Games is, it's where you take two teams of 4 or 5, and one person from each team starts in 2 rings side by side, completely encased by a steel cage with a roof. That's traditional War Games. So 2 men would start, one from each side, and then after an interval, usually 5 minutes, another member that from the team that won the coin flip would come in, and then it would alternate back and forth until all 10 guys were in there, and then that was the only way that you could win, and it could only be ended by submission or quitting, which is the same thing, which I don't understand, but that you couldn't pin, and there was no escape because you're locked in. There's a roof. There's all that. So since WWE has revived it in 2017, there's been no roof, and they've kind of opened it up that way. And I'll talk about my feelings about that as we go on. But anyway, that's kind of the rules for the match. And with Survivor Series, it was also elimination, but you had all 5 guys from both teams just on the apron being tagged. It was a tag match, a 10-man tag match, and you could get eliminated to where it could end up being 5 on 1. Whereas War Games, there's no elimination. It's just people are coming in, kind of like Royal Rumble style, and then only one person has to submit, and then you win the whole match. So, I have a long history with War Games. Never saw it at a house show. They did a lot of that. That was the difference too. Survivor Series was once a year. Occasionally, years later, they would do some of those Survivor Series matches on a Raw or SmackDown or something like that, or something very similar. But War Games would travel. They would take the cage with them. They would do a bunch of house shows. It wasn't just pay-per-views for the first few years. And then it became I think it was at Great American Bash for a couple times, Wrestle War, and then it kind of found its home in Fall Brawl, where it stayed until it ended, until WCW closed, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But actually, I take that back. They did one on Nitro. That was the last one. They did one on Nitro in 2000. Until that, it was Fall Brawl. But not all the matches were great back in the WCW NWA days, but some of them were pretty memorable. Some of them were really good, and some of them made all of us old school fans big fans of War Games. And when WCW was purchased by WWE, that was the one thing that people were clamoring for: bring War Games back. For 16 years, for 16 years, from the demise of WCW in 2001 to 2017, when NXT finally brought the concept back, fans were clamoring and screaming, bring War Games back. And for 16 years, we had a drought of no War Games. So when it did come back, and it was the Undisputed Era, of course, they were the four-band faction at the time, defending against Alexander Wolf, Eric Young, and Killian Dane, and the Authors of Pain. That was it was just I can't even describe my feelings when I found that out. I was so excited. I was over the moon, elated, all that stuff when they announced that it was coming back. And not only was it coming back, it was coming back in November, traditional time for this event. And again, it's remaining in November, but now it's not NXT. It is in Survivor Series. So that is really cool. I don't even. I'm excited by this news, but I'm also a little saddened because I'm an old school wrestling fan. I've been watching it all for a very long time. I love wrestling, and I love my classic stuff. And so Survivor Series has been one of those things that we have not gotten a traditional Survivor Series for a very long time. We get a traditional Survivor Series match. We get one, and it's usually Raw versus SmackDown. And now that's kind of the note that we have to go out on, that our last traditional Survivor Series match was Raw versus SmackDown. And not that I love the way that the classic Survivor Series matches have been implemented, where it's just ragtag groups coming together and fighting just for whatever reason, some random reason. I don't love that. I love the way that the WarGames teams come together. It's basically Hell in a Cell, but for teams, whereas it's the culmination of a long-standing feud. And it's like you can't do anything else. You end it in WarGames, and I like that concept. I like that idea, and I would have loved to have seen more of that implemented into those traditional Survivor Series matches, because that would make more sense. Instead, excuse me, you would get some feuds coming to a head, but it would be multiple feuds and just lump them together. So like, okay, these two tag teams are fighting and these two solo guys are fighting. And then these guys kind of don't like each other from a couple of years ago. So we'll put these four together and fight those four together. And that makes perfect sense. It works on paper, I guess, but when you're watching it, you don't get as invested and as excited because there's not a long-standing group beef here. Whereas with WarGames, it's typically a long-standing thing, like Sanity and Undisputed Era, or the Horsemen and Dusty Rhodes, or NWO and the WCW Faithful, and that kind of thing. When it's that kind of blood feud, if you will, it makes more interesting matches to watch. And we didn't get a whole lot of that in the history of Survivor Series. So I can understand some of the disdain or trepidation for those types of matches and why they might need to go away. I don't know, but I'm going to miss them. And I'll talk more about that in just a second after the break. If you're a fan of comic books and podcasts, you should check out Comic Book Weekly, Comic Frontline's podcast all about the world of comics, where we share our top 5 comics of the week, talk about the latest news in the industry, and interact with our viewers live each and every Tuesday night at 10:15 p.m. Eastern Time. You can check us out at youtube.com/comicfrontline or search for Comic Book Weekly on YouTube. So I don't know about you, but I did not get to watch the first Survivor Series live. I did get to watch the second one. And from that point on, I watched Survivor Series. I think there was a couple I missed when, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So there were times I didn't have cable or could afford pay-per-view and that kind of thing. So that's why I like these streaming services and having access to that for a monthly fee now. I think that's a better model and it's easier on the wallet. But I missed that first one. But that was a huge spectacle, and they never did that quite like that again. Whereas that first one, if you don't know, was, and I'll get back to WarGames in just a second, but that first Survivor Series, they were all traditional Survivor Series matches, and one of them was 5 tag teams versus 5 tag teams. Can you imagine WWE with that many tag teams and actually putting them all in one match? That's insane. But yeah, so you had what is 20 guys? I understand why they never did that again, and they should never do that again. But every match beyond that was 5-on-5, 5-on-5. Yeah, I think you had like 4 or 5 matches, and it was all 5-on-5s. And that was a little overkill. I liked when they kind of changed it up, and they would have like 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 Survivor Series matches, and then sprinkle in a bunch of other kind of matches, title matches and whatnot, feud matches and things like that. And I liked it better when they mattered a little bit more. So yeah, they're few and far between, and you don't remember a whole lot. I think honestly, my most memorable Survivor Series moment was when Sting debuted in WWE and came to the ring, and then Dolph Ziggler won. And it's like, wow, he got the rub finally. Yeah, so that wasn't even like a huge Survivor Series in terms of like those traditional matches and everything. And the other one that stands out in my mind is when they did that experimental thing that they only did once, where they had all the winners of the Survivor Series matches then team up at the end in one like final battle. And it was only Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior left standing against like 5 other guys, and of course, they won. I thought that was a cool concept, but again, I liked it better when they only had a couple, but I hate that we don't get any now. At the same time, I love War Games. War Games is one of those events that, yes, we have similar things. We have Hell in a Cell, we have Elimination Chamber, we have cage matches, we have elimination matches. We have similar things, but there's something special about the concept of War Games, where, like I talked about earlier, it's the culmination of a feud. So in the WCW era, one that stood out for me was at the beginning of NWO, and I think it was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Lex Luger, and Sting was supposed to be their partner, and they were fighting the NWO. I forget which group it was, but it was I think fake Sting was involved in that. Let me see if I can find it real quick, because I do have them all pulled up here. Yeah, it was Hollywood Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and NWO Sting. So it was like the original NWO members, and then the fake Sting. So Sting, the real Sting, was nowhere to be found, and he came in later at the end, towards the end of the match, and like beat up all of NWO, and then I forget what he said, but he said something derogatory to the rest of his team, and then walked out, and that was it. And the next time you saw Sting, I believe, um, was when he came out and said, the only thing about Sting that's for sure is nothing's for sure. And then he walks off and you don't see him for weeks, and he comes back as the Crow gimmick. And the reason that match stands out in my mind, not because it was a great match or anything, but because it was the beginning of Crow Sting. And that's always going to stick in my memory, as that was the nail in the coffin. That was the last straw that pushed Sting over the edge, them not believing him, not trusting him. And that match was the end of it. And he was like, you know what? I'm done. Screw you all. And now I'm this. And I love that match for that reason and that reason alone. But still, those classic ones hold a a dear place in my heart. One of the first WCW pay-per-views, it might be the first WCW pay-per-view I ever saw, was Great American Bash 1989, and it featured a War Games match that was the Road Warriors, the Midnight Express, and Dr. Death Steve Williams facing the Samoan SWAT team, which was Samu Fatu, which was Rikishi, was Fatu, and the Freebirds, which at the time was Michael P.S. Hayes, Jimmy Garvin, Jimmy Jam Garvin, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy. And I love that match. It was a really cool match. I know that people criticize about the War Games roof being too short, but they utilized it in a way that there was a point where Hawk, I think he was military pressing Jimmy Garvin, and he just kept military pressing him up against the roof of the cage. And it was fun to watch. They were utilizing the cage in different ways, even the roof. And I thought that was a cool way to use that space, even though, yes, maybe it was too short. And I can understand the reasoning. You can do more spots and leaps off the top if you don't have a roof. But in my mind, when you take the roof off the cage, you're eliminating the reason to lock the other team members out. Because okay, you're keeping the cage door locked, fine. They can just climb over and get inside of it. So what's the point? The whole reason for the roof is to keep everybody out. Of course, we've seen in WWE history that doesn't work even in Hell in a Cell or even in Elimination Chamber at times. So it doesn't really matter all that much as long as we get War Games and as long as you keep the guys on the ground and don't let them climb over and get in. Just kind of have that part of the story element. For whatever reason, they've decided they're not going to do it that way. I think it's missing that element. I would appreciate it if they could just like heighten the cage a little bit so they could get that roof in there. But I guess the only way they could do that is if they extend it to the floor like a Hell in a Cell, and then it's like just a giant Hell in a Cell. So I'll live with it as it is because we get it, and we still got blood and guts over in AEW. Their version of War Games, which is fine. It's a little bit more brutal. It's more like the classic WCW stuff with in the Dusty Rhodes Four Horsemen era. But after this next break, we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of matches we could possibly see at this year's Survivor Series that could fit into that War Games mystique. So we'll do that in just a quick flash. If my mouse will work so I can click this next little video. Hey, do you like free stuff? You can get a free digital fan-made AEW comic from creator Todd Black just by signing up for our VIP mailing list at allpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll also receive periodic updates about content coming to you from the Allcast and exclusive offers. So go sign up and get your free comic today. All right, so thinking about War Games this year, we only have 2 matches, so men's and women's. Who could we possibly see at this year's War Games? Now, I'm going to start with the women's because I think that one's a little easier to figure out. I think Damage Control is a shoe-in, a sure fit for this. It's already a 3-person faction. You don't really have any other factions in the women's division, at least not on the main roster. I'm not sure. I'm a little behind on NXT, so I don't know what's going on over there. I know Toxic Attraction is kind of split up. Mandy's over there, and Toxic Attraction's on SmackDown. So if you had them, that could be another possibility. But I could see you doing Damage Control and teaming them up with, I don't know, just throwing out there Ronda Rousey. And then you do whoever Damage Control's feuding with at that time, whether it's still Bianca, Alexa, and Asuka, or if it's someone else, and throwing in Liv Morgan with them. I could see that. That's really with the women, unless you're bringing in the NXT crowd. That's the only ones that make sense. Or if you bring Sasha and Naomi back, that would be a really cool way to bring them back as well. I don't know who they would feud with. I'm not sure. I'm trying to go down the roster in my head, thinking about talents that are hot right now. You could see Raquel and Aaliyah involved in it in some way, shape, or form. You could see Becky Lynch return, maybe. Maybe this is where Charlotte Flair returns. Maybe you, man, can you imagine if you somehow reunited the 4 Horsemen women for this? Maybe not this year, but next year. Some way, some shape, some way, somehow is what I meant to say. That could be cool. Or, it could just be random. I don't love the random idea. I like feuds built, and we already have a faction that's, 3 women. You could add a 4th to them and, increase Damage Control to 4 women, or just add, like I said, add a partner that makes sense feud-wise that, that could gel well together. That could work really well. Yeah, I don't know, aside from random stuff, but we have 2 months to build up to this. So it's not like we have to decide based on storylines that are going on right now. but we can definitely see the seeds that are planted. But given that the women's roster is not incredibly deep, and they're not doing, or they haven't been doing a whole lot yet with some of the talents, but we've seen like Shotzi's come back. We've heard rumors that the Tank is going to resurface at some point. So she's obviously got a face turn going on right now. And Liv Morgan's really hot. So unless she's defending the title, or if she's even still champion, that can play into the WarGames match as well. And we also don't know if it is going to be just WWE roster people, or if they are going to throw in NXT with that. On the men's side, it's a little bit more difficult because the obvious answer is the Bloodline. There's 4 of them. 5. If you do the 5-on-5, you throw in Sammy. But there's rumors that you're leading towards Sammy getting back with Kevin and facing the Usos because of the problem between Jay and Sammy. I can't imagine Roman throwing Jay out in favor of Sammy. I just don't see that as the ultimate conclusion here. That just doesn't make sense to me, unless somehow Jay loses the titles and he gets blamed for it, and you go down that road. But I think that resolves itself before you get to Survivor Series. So, yeah, I mean, the Bloodline's the obvious answer. That would make the most sense. But who do they face, right? What other 4 people are going to go against them? Is it going to be a Drew McIntyre-led team? Is it just going to be a ragtag group of people? Is it going to be like the New Day? And I don't know. I don't even know. Like the New Day and the Street Profits team up against the entire 5-person Bloodline. That could be cool. If you go for a little higher profile, you got to throw in somebody like Drew McIntyre, Braun Strowman, maybe. But then it's just like, again, it's a ragtag group, which it's probably going to have to be. It's probably going to be a team that's trying to get the tag titles, and then, a top contender trying to go after the world title. So depending on how this Logan Paul thing goes, maybe Logan Paul's in it. Anyway, now I could see Braun Strowman, or maybe Bray Wyatt returns. And, it's Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt, and, again, throw in the New Day, or there's not a whole lot of tag teams to choose from, and that's why I'm having a little hard time. Or maybe it's Kevin and Sammy with Braun or Drew McIntyre or something like that. So there's a lot of options that you could play around with depending on how storylines go between now and then. Throwing out the Bloodline, say Roman's defending the world title at the Survivor Series instead. I doubt it, because he's defending at Crown Jewel, so I don't think he's going to have 2 title defenses. He may not even be at Survivor Series because he's at Crown Jewel, right? So if for whatever reason you can't do Bloodline, who do you do? Who do you throw in WarGames? A returning Adam Cole, but he's under contract with AEW. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's injured. I don't think that's an option on the table. I know people would love to see it. But I don't think that's in the cards for this year, at least. And we've seen Undisputed Era in the cage. We don't need to see that yet. We can do something else. You could go the route of Miz and Ciampa in there. Ciampa's been in it before. Miz is kind of, I like Miz. I love Miz. I'm not saying anything about Miz, but Miz and WarGames, it's not really a fit for me. So I don't see that. So I'm trying to think, like, what other factions that you could come up with. If you go old school WarGames and you just like take a tag team and some single guys, or a 3-person team and some single guys, again, going back to New Day, or you could throw in Alpha Academy. Please don't put Alpha Academy in the WarGames. Man, that's hard. Judgment Day. Judgment Day is another great choice. You could throw Judgment Day with somebody else. So you've got Finn Balor, Damian Priest, and Dominic Mysterio. We teased AJ Styles here with Finn recently. If you threw in AJ Styles, if AJ Styles came over to the dark side and joined Judgment Day, reunion of the club, right, with Finn and AJ, that's a 4-man team. You got Rhea on the outside. You could do something with that. Judgment Day versus Edge's team, Edge, Rey Mysterio, whoever else they get together. So that's definitely an option as well. Man, I'd love to see Johnny Gargano, is it Gargano or I think it's Gargano. Johnny Gargano. I'll just call him Johnny Wrestling. Johnny Wrestling in there. Austin Theory, I'd love to see in the cage. I mean, there's individuals I'd love to see. Dolph Ziggler, Randy Orton if he came back, and Riddle teaming up with somebody, maybe Ray and Edge. That would be a cool face-off. There's different ways you could go that would make sense. I think the Bloodline is the best option, but again, if Roman's wrestling at Crown Jewel, I don't know that he's going to be at Survivor Series 3 weeks later. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. But yeah, there's a lot of cool matchups that you could probably imagine, and probably some more creative ones than I've come up with. I'd love to hear your thoughts on who you'd love to see in WarGames this year at this year's Survivor Series, both for the men's and women's, and why. Why does it make sense in your mind and your reasoning for whatever teams that you're picking to come together and fight at WarGames? And do you miss the traditional Survivor Series matches? Would you like to see them somehow incorporated in the future, if not at this year's? So anyway, those are my thoughts on WarGames. And I will close with this because I did say I'd talk about it a little bit. I am really enjoying the changes that this new regime at WWE has been implementing. It feels exciting to watch Raw and SmackDown again. I'm invested once more. I'm not behind on these. I remember talking in early episodes of the show that AEW I stayed up to date with, but Raw and SmackDown, sometimes it'd be 2, 3, 4 weeks of episodes I'd have to catch up on and speed through and watch like the highlights and that kind of thing. But now I'm current with Raw and SmackDown. I can't wait to watch them to see maybe what wrestler is going to come back, what gimmick is going to come back. Like when Dexter Lumis started showing up and Gargano came out, and all this, and Ciampa's now in a good spot, and all these NXT guys are getting proper pushes and getting screen time and being themselves. Kevin Owens is back to being Kevin Owens. All these things that are coming together, you're seeing, like I said at the beginning of the show, people that were fired like Braun Strowman coming back and getting a push again, and gimmicks that were done away with, and just people being able to be themselves again. And I love it. It's exciting. It's fun. The storytelling's better. The wrestling is better. They're a little bit less inhibited, not by themselves, but, not constrained as much, it seems. It feels like. And I just love it. I'm loving WWE right now. And I'm happy to say that I'm thrilled that there are options that I can enjoy both now and talk about them both excitedly. And I'm looking forward to Survivor Series. I'm looking forward to Extreme Rules. Crown Jewel's another thing. I'm not going to talk about that at all. But I'm happy that things are on an uptick for WWE, and hopefully they continue to trend that way. And I will also say this: the Royal Rumble, which is my favorite wrestling event of all time, is in San Antonio next year in January. I live 20 minutes outside of San Antonio. I'm in the San Antonio area. So I'm hoping that I can go. I've never been to a Royal Rumble, and I've actually never been to a pay-per-view live. So I'm hoping I can do that. And if I do, I will definitely share my experience with you all. So cross your fingers for me. But that's it. That's all I got for you today. Survivor Series, WarGames on the horizon. Can't wait. So until next time, please hit that subscribe notification bell. Give me a thumbs up, and follow me on all the socials and all that jazz. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay awesome and keep watching wrestling. Take care.